listening to This Won't Fix You. I'm your host, Nadine Pittham, and this show is a curation of interesting models, metaphors and images discovered or manifested through my work as an accredited psychotherapist. You can expect to hear nifty ideas, clever language and thought-provoking ways of looking at life. Each episode, you'll get one of two alternating perspectives. First, a conversation which introduces and discusses the theory or idea, and we call this the A side, and then the B side, which, while not therapy, is a deeper exploration of that theory or idea from a more therapeutic standpoint. Hello and welcome. Today we're going to talk about a quote by Claire Diamond, and the quote, in short at least, is "The mind fears its own projections," and it's basically about how majority of our fears are actually conjured in the mind itself. But before we get into the discussion, let me introduce my co-host. I'm joined today by Meg Harper. Hi, Meg.
Hello, Nadine.
And would you like to introduce who you are, where you work, and what people might need to know about you?
Okay, so I'm Meg Harper. I work as a counsellor with adults, children, young people and couples. I'm based in Warwick, in lovely Warwickshire. My background was originally in person-centred therapy, and then I branched out into CBT and some other types of therapy. So I have kind of an eclectic profile now.
Do you love it?
I do love it. Yes, it's endlessly fascinating. I've had various different careers, and this is the one that has, just endless interest. I always feel there's more I can learn.
Today's episode will be really helpful for you if you find yourself battling with anxiety on a regular basis. We might desperately want to rid ourselves of thoughts or intrusive ruminations. We might frequently catastrophize about our futures or about circumstances that we think are going to overcome us, overwhelm us at some point. And certainly for me, Meg, this is a really, really common thing that happens. People come in with this a lot.
Yes, I'd agree, totally. Yes, I think every client I see, what we're talking about here will have some relevance.
Wow, every single client.
Yeah, I was discussing this. I've discussed it with a few people over the last few days and beginning to wonder this idea that our mind fears its own projections. Is it actually the root cause of every type of mental health problem? So, the jury's out on that. But I'm almost at the conclusion that is it. That is the big thing that we need to really get to terms with.
The root of everything, that basically it's the mind that is creating the problems.
Yes. Obviously, there will be things that happen to the mind, trauma being the obvious thing. And you could say, well, that's not the mind's own projection. Grief is another, that's not the mind's own projection. But often how we deal with those issues, it very much depends on what our mind projects, how we end up feeling long term.
So the trauma is actually in how we deal with the thing. It's not what happens, it's how we deal with what happens. That's where trauma is kind of compounded.
Yes, I think so. Yes. Let's take an example.
Well, actually, before you do, let me read the quote, because perhaps it would be really helpful for people to hear the quote. It's from a book by Claire Diamond. Claire Diamond also runs courses and she runs a podcast called The Superpowered Mind. But the book that the quote comes from originally is called Home. And I'll read it's about 2 or 3 sentences.
Okay.
And she says, "What's really at stake in our everyday fear and insecurity is not the physical body, it's the idea of ourselves as the controller that has to survive. What is at stake is the thing that gets scared when things aren't known, or that feels that it has to nail everything down to know what's going to happen. It's the insanity of all of us, the mind's fears of its own projections."
So that idea of having to be the controller, it's all the having to be's that then become problematic. So often in counselling we talk about the shoulds, don't we? So if you take a typical modern person, they might be saying what they should be, invulnerable. They can cope with anything. They should be, perfect. They should be making a difference in the world. They should be achieving. They should be in fulfilling relationships. Um, they should be
That's quite a
sexually.
lot, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, and it goes on and on and on. These are things that they should be, and they should be in control of these things. Because if they're not in control, then they're in this place of uncertainty, and the uncertainty is like the most scary thing. And
Mm.
that's like kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Because if you're thinking of somebody living in a very primitive situation, and you're uncertain what that rustling in the bushes is, well, that's scary because it could be a rabbit or it could
Mm.
be a saber-toothed tiger. Um, you know, but then you bring that back into what we're facing now and going, well, I have to know, I have to be able to be in control of it. And if not, then I create this frightening projection. I think it is the saber-toothed tiger rather than the little bunny rabbit, and then I'm scared of that.
And I'm
And
doing that in order to try to
be
secure
safe.
an outcome,
Yeah,
in
to
order
be
to
safe.
try and deal with it, kind of thing in my
Yeah,
head.
yeah.
Mm.
And so, I think the lady you quoted, whose name I can't remember already.
Claire Diamond.
Yeah, Claire Diamond. She's absolutely on it, that is what's going on, and it's all about protection. And it's interesting, isn't it? Like that when people are worried about their health. I mean, I know all about this because one of my projections is always, yep, it's definitely deathly. Whatever I've got, it's going to be the end. And then once you know what it is, that actually, that's just a spot. It's not cancer. It's just a spot. You just put some TCP on it and it'll all be fine. Then, you feel in control. The uncertainty has gone, and you feel so much better because what you were scared of was the projection that this is actually terminal cancer. And you look at that in absolutely everything that we're troubled by, and that idea seems to fit. Well, it does to me anyway.
I agree with you, and what you're saying is that the brain is manifesting the whole thing all on its own, and it's the brain's job, like you said about the rabbit in the bush or the saber-toothed
Yes,
tiger. This is actually the brain's job,
yes,
evolutionary, from an evolutionary
yes,
perspective. Let's
yes,
make sure that we can see where everything's going to go wrong. Let's use all the inputs that we've had in our life previously, all the experiences, all the advice that we've heard, everything goes into the brain, and then the brain tries to predict the future.
yes.
But like you say, it's not interested in happy futures. Why would it be interested in that? Because that's not going to risk
Not-
our lives. So it has to predict the most terrible things so that we
yes,
can, uh,
yes.
yeah, try and engineer safety from that.
Exactly. And so I think, in acceptance and commitment therapy, they have this lovely idea of just going, well, thank you, mind, and then moving on. So, like, thank you for giving me that totally terrifying idea. I see you're doing your job. Thanks very much, but no thanks right now. And it's like not resisting it, because so often that's a problem, isn't it? People think, oh, I've spotted this thing that I'm doing that's not really helping me, so I'm going to really resist it. And then you're back to, well, don't think about pink elephants, and then all you think about is pink
Hmm.
elephants. So if you can just go, aha, I see what you're doing, I see what you're up to, thanks very much, but actually I'm going to get on and stay calm. That works so much
You're
better.
talking about shame there as well, aren't you? Because as soon as we can't extricate ourselves from that vortex, then we start blaming ourselves. And of course, it's that belief then that keeps it all in place, because then it's just piling on more and more anxiety, isn't it? And we think then
Yes,
somehow our nervous system is feeling like our life depends on our ability to solve this conundrum that we're being presented with. But
yes,
actually, it's that in itself that is then causing the distress. And then because
yes,
I can't get myself out of this vortex, then, oh God, I must be broken. So then that adds shame onto it. Then we're more of a failure because we can't control our thoughts. And
yes.
oh, it's just one on top of the
Yes,
other, and
yes, yes,
round and round we go.
exactly. Yes, exactly. And back to the shoulds, I should be perfect. I should be able to handle this. I should be able to control my mind. And so, oh, I am useless because I can't. But of course, actually, it's really difficult because, as we've talked about, our minds are trying to keep us safe. So you've got all that going on. You're like, it's Steve Peters in the chimp paradox. He talks about like the chimp brain. You've got your chimp brain going, there's something scary here. And then your prefrontal cortex going, there, chimp, have a banana. It's okay. But actually, the chimp's going, no, bananas aren't going to fix it. I'm terrified. And then we're going, oh gosh, there must be something wrong with my prefrontal cortex because it can't can't calm the chimp down. But actually, it is hard. And in CBT, we talk about different metaphor here, but talking about you creating new neural pathways here. So your old neural pathway is be terrified. That's a scary thing. You've got to deal with it. And you're doing that again and again and again. So you've got this really big, strong neural pathway, like a motorway. That's my go-to be frightened thing going on. And then you're coming along and go, no, let's beat a new pathway through the jungle. Okay, we've got to do this differently. And then you think about if you go for a walk through the fields and you're trying to beat a pathway, that's really tough compared with just going, walking along the decent path. And so that takes time. You've got to keep rewalking that path and rewalking that path and rewalking it until it is a nice broad pathway that becomes your go-to, rather than I'm terrified, go down this motorway. Does that make sense?
It makes absolute sense.
Yeah.
It does. I've heard a similar metaphor, and it is as difficult as that. And again, contributes to that sense of failure as we're trying to overcome it.
Yes, exactly. And clients coming back to you and going, I can't do it, or I tried it and it didn't work. And you're going, yeah, well, you have to keep doing it. Sorry.
Yeah, it's a kind of posture, isn't it? It's a perspective on the world.
Yes.
And I wonder as well, there was something you said before your motorway thicket, beating a path through the forest metaphor, when you were talking about the brain trying to fix the problems. And sometimes, I imagine, sometimes in our past, actually our brains have helped us. There are times where our analytical brain can solve problems, because it is brilliant, is it not, when it is solving the right kinds of problems. And it can negotiate and navigate and free us from all sorts of situations. And so again, that just contributes to the brain's learning that, if I just think in the right way, if I just I've just got to work harder and I will come up with the right solution.
Yes.
Because it has helped. The brain does sometimes.
Yes, absolutely it does. And so, it's our benefit and also our curse, isn't it? So, the number of, especially young people, they talk about, I overthink too much. And you go, well, yes, you do. But the reason you do that is you've been taught to think, haven't you? As well as like the mind doing it of its own volition. But you go to school and you're being taught all the time, be a critical thinker, analyze this. That's what our society tells you to do. And then you're in a situation where what I've got to do is really think very hard about it, and then I will solve it. But of course, some of these things that's just not the helpful way to go about it. The more you think about it, the more you just keep rebuilding your pathway of fear, if you like.
But we have been rewarded for it, haven't you? Like you say, in schools, it's not just that we're taught to do it, but then when we do it well, we're rewarded, and our self, and in air quotes, inverted commas, our self is then the egoic self is then validated. Because we get better grades, our parents are all very happy, and our society is kind of built around that kind of success. And it is, like you say, it's a cognitive success. It's a brain-based success. And actually what we're losing then is a connection to, oh God, what are we going to call this? Because this could sound really wanky. What we're losing is a connection to an authentic self, or a connection to a sort of intuition. Maybe that's the best word.
Yes. The sort of contented self that can be calm, rather than this driven self, which is always about, I've got to fulfill all these shoulds. I'm sorry to get political here, but I do feel that a huge amount of this is tied up with capitalism, and that, like, I must be productive. I must be the best in my workplace. I'm in schools, because I've worked a lot in schools. I must get all A stars. I must, prove to everybody that I'm worthy. I am worth it. And because we're kind of living in a meritocracy, aren't we? There's that. If you do not succeed, it is your own fault. Whereas, in the past, and Alan de Botton writes about this in, I think, his book Status Anxiety, which I think I really recommend, an excellent book. But he talks about, like, in the past, when we were like, I'd have been a peasant, and then there's the Lord, the Lord of the Manor, he's got all the bounty, hasn't he? But he also, there was that attitude that, God had put you in your place and you stayed in your place. And then the Lord of the Manor would distribute bounty upon you because you poor thing, you are a poor thing. It's not your fault, but it's up to the Lord of the Manor to, obviously he can be evil and starve you to death and so on, or he can be the bringer of largesse. And, and then you'd have a bit of a miserable time in many ways because, of course, you're possibly starving, or you're going to die in a famine, or that is starving, isn't it? But die of disease or whatever. But at least you didn't have this, what in my view is like really bad for our mental health paradigm, that it's your own fault. If you're poor and you're miserable and you're diseased, do something about it. Because we're in that kind of like, you've got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps straps, and get on your bike. And sorry, you can tell how old I am. Go out, because the unemployment of the 1980s, it was like, just go and find a job, just get on your bike and go. Because we have that idea that all of this is our own fault, then of course we're like, well, I've got to solve it. I've got to use my analytic brain and solve it. And if I can't, back to the shame again.
Oh, and actually, yeah, I kind of want to put some space around that, because that is a brutal space to be stuck in, isn't it? I
Mm,
must maximize,
mm,
optimize efficiency, my time, my
yeah.
energies, and that is brutal. It's a brutal society. It's a
Mm,
brutal
mm,
structure.
And then we wonder why we have mental health problems. And in young people, it utterly, it breaks my heart to see children continually put through this system, which is toxic and is going to just generate more and more mental health problems.
Mm. Yeah, because the thing is, what's that brilliant quote? The trouble with being in the rat race is, even if you win, you're still a rat. And I don't like the idea of calling people rats in that sense, but I do like the idea that all we're winning at here is somebody else's game,
Yes,
and that
yes,
if we come out the other side, and I frequently see people in their 20s who've succeeded exponentially at school and then at
yes,
university, and then
yes.
they're kind of spewed out into a world that where that doesn't seem to, it just doesn't translate in the same way. It's not as simple. That meritocracy you were talking about is just
Mm,
not as simple as that.
mm, mm.
And their happiness is no longer tied to it, because the projection, the trajectory is no longer, if I get that A, then
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
If I succeed in that meeting, then that. Everything just becomes so much more broad, more vague.
Mm, mm,
And there's so much opportunity then for unhappiness and
mm.
discontent to seep in.
Yes, yes. I mean, I write a blog which is hugely out of date for various personal reasons. I need to get back to it, but I called it No More Gold Stars, and
Hmm.
I started it because I was working so much with teenagers for whom this was a problem, and it was a friend of one of my daughters had said, I did all that you've just talked about. You keep getting rewarded at school and being told how brilliant you are, and being given gold stars, and she's spewed out of university, struggling to find a decent job, coping with trying to rent in London, all of that, and going, who's going to give me the gold stars now?
Hmm.
There isn't
Yeah,
going
I
to
now
be.
disappear,
Yeah,
because the only way I've found my worth, or not the only way, but
yeah.
the most rewarded and prevalent way that I've found my worth has been in this system, doing it this way.
Mm,
Yeah,
mm,
so who am I now?
exactly.
And that's devastating
Mm,
for the self. And I think certainly Claire Diamond, having read a few of her books and listened to her podcast regularly, she talks a lot about that system then, of the self just perpetuating itself, and the ego, and that the ego always sounds like such a harsh word, like it's a criticism somehow, but we do
mm,
all have one.
yes,
And it's kind of, the version of ourselves that we want the world to see. We all have one of those, and our society just perpetuates the need to maintain that certain look, that
yes,
certain
yeah.
self in the world, and that is ongoing and eternal. We will never escape that.
But I think what is so sad is that, it doesn't have to be like this. And if you look back at ancient wisdom, like if you look at, say, the Tao, it's so different, because essentially, the Tao means the way, and the way
Mm.
that is being talked about in that writing is about just being content with what you have, and accepting that, this idea that I need to change the world, maybe accepting the world as it is, and just going, and that's okay. And I can feel in myself already those comments coming up, like, oh my god, but what about the climate crisis? So we've got to change something. What about, I need to make sure that I'm being a useful person in the world. um because that's what I've been brought up with. That's what's been put into my DNA, if you like. It's my core beliefs, and I can feel the resistance to that sort of
Mm.
thinking, and my counter arguments. But the fact is, we're not happier than we were then. When
Absolutely.
Lao Tse, what's his name? I can never pronounce his name. Lao Tzu, isn't it? That's him. When he was writing the Tao, we're not happier. We kind of we feel like we should be, and that's another thing, isn't it? That there's that I should be happier. I've
Mm.
got everything. I hear that a lot from my clients. I should be happy. Why am I not? But of course, if you're in this, like you're talking about the rat race, no, that's not a place to be happy, is it?
And that's, so we're either postponing our happiness and pinning our happiness on a future acquisition or a future achievement, or
Mm,
we're blaming ourselves for not being happy because we've got all the things now. So either way, we're thinking happiness is outside ourselves and it is
yes,
elsewhere. It is
yes,
something I've not yet found, rather than it being.
yes,
For me, it feels like the longer I do this job, that what we do with a lot of people, with probably all the people that come to us, is we try and remove. We're not actually building. We're not adding to their understanding of themselves. What we're trying to do is remove all the false acquisitions of understanding. We're trying to remove all of that and get back to some sort of essential, inherent kind of. I think one of the metaphors I'm going to talk about at some point is the tuning fork. That it's just become corroded and rusted and full of debris and dust. And actually, what we need to do is take that away, because then
yes,
what you get is you get that pure.
yes. I love your metaphor of the tuning fork, and I was sort of thinking about it and thinking, like, if we think about, because there's the quote we're working from is about projections, and going like, what is a sort of projection metaphor that's a bit similar to your tuning fork? And I was like, I think I'm thinking of like a director's cut, that whatever we're projecting, we bring our own director's cut to it. So if we take my own, family of origin, I've got a mother who very loving but quite controlling, with very, very inflexible ideas, um, with a disability, and a Christian faith. I've got a dad who was privately really quite damaged by his war experience. That bring all that in. I'm living in Stockport, a sort of urban environment, quite not really poor, but certainly not wealthy,
Mm.
and all the stuff that goes with that, about waste not, want not, and work is good, definitely Protestant work ethic. You bring all that, then you bring in, like, I was. I wouldn't call it bullied, but I was certainly picked on at secondary school by a bunch of girls who I see as really quite very unpleasant. You bring all of that and then go, that all comes into my director's cut. So
Mm.
whatever I experience, all of that is going to project, is like a sort of projection on a projection, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I'm seeing, I will see through this lens, if you like, of my director's cut. I'm not sure I'm mixing metaphors there.
That makes absolute sense.
Yeah.
And
So
you can't help but see it through
you
that.
can't help but, exactly, which is not your fault, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. But what you can do is become more and more aware of it and go, aha, I see why I am responding to this situation in that way, and other people aren't. So,
Mm.
a personal example is, I actually find groups of women quite threatening, because
Of course you do.
the experience at school, and especially if it's an educational setting, like I go on a course and there's a group of women, And if they look, that's that transference thing that we know about. If they look a bit like the people who bullied me, then whoa, all my hackles are raised,
Mm.
the stomach starts churning, the anxiety is present because of my director's cut, which is projecting onto the projector, if you like.
Can I ask you then how you deal with that? Because you will overcome that. You're a therapist, you've been through the training, you can identify it, you can sense those hackles rising when you're in the moment. It sounds
Yes.
like you overcome it. What is it you do? I feel like that would be interesting for people to hear
How do
how
I
to
overcome it?
be
Well, I
stronger than
think
that.
I think I think there's a lot in Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. That wonderful book by, oh goodness, Susan Jeffers, isn't it? I mean, that book is excellent for people who are struggling with any sort of fear, I think. And, the title is a really important part of it, that it's
And we're
going,
not going to rid ourselves of the fear.
no, we're not going to rid ourselves of the fear. And she talks about, fear is a place of growth. You're not growing if you're not a little bit fearful. So you go, all right, so I can feel the fear, but I don't need to think it's a tiger when it's only a rabbit, you know, and I
Mm.
can be aware that these women are not those women. They might look a bit like them, but they're not. And go, right, just carry on and it'll probably be okay. And of course, then, it is okay. It
Mm.
is okay
So
because
then you get disconfirming experiences. Your
yes,
experiences disconfirm that narrative, and I
yes,
imagine then it
yes,
gets smaller and smaller marginally
yes,
each
yes,
time.
each time. Yes. So I think that helps. And
So
then
it's an awareness.
it's
Sorry,
an
and
awareness. It
yeah,
is. It's an awareness, and then an acting on the awareness and not backing off. And of course, obviously, sometimes you do. Sometimes I'm too bloody scared to push through here. But I do believe that the solution to fear is to go, right, face it, yeah, look at it, and then keep going. And it's like the monster in the cupboard is far more scary if you don't open the door, because actually there is no monster in the cupboard. But while the door
hmm,
is shut, you're making this projection, aren't
hmm.
you, that the monster is enormous and it's going to eat you. But actually, it's not there at all.
I'd
Um,
love to come back to that in terms of the difference. You're saying so much. The difference between what is a kind of projected fear and what is a kind of a red flag. I'd like to come back to that just in a
oh,
moment,
interesting.
because there
Yeah.
are some things that are red flags, and we
Yes.
should heed those.
Yes.
I say should, I'm
Yes.
going to use that word
Yes.
advisedly. But before we
Yes.
get there, I kind of want to just pop back to the girls from school and the women from courses, or the groups of women
Yeah.
you might encounter as an
Yeah.
adult. And go back to the brain and say, yeah, well done, Meg's brain, because Meg's brain there is spotting a pattern. Oh,
Yeah.
last time we were in a scenario, oh, not last time, one significant time, several significant times when we were in the presence of these kinds of people with these kinds of patterns being kind of together at this moment.
Yeah.
This is what happened to us. We were, I don't know, I'm going to assume now, we were humiliated, we were isolated, all those kind of psychologically terrifying things. So
Yeah.
your brain, Meg's brain's going,
Ah,
alert,
yes.
alert. This
Yes.
last time we were here, this caused
Yeah.
psychological collapse. This caused
Yes. Yeah.
devastation.
Yeah.
And so, like you say, well done, brain.
Yes.
Thank you. Because actually, we
Yes.
want our brains to
To,
have that, don't we?
yes, to take care of us. But I
Mm.
think also, I mean, I often say to my clients that your brain is listening to itself all the time. So you have to start feeding into it things that are now true, rather than those kind of difficulties of the past, which are, they were true then, but they're not true anymore. It's fascinating. I used to have, when I was working in school, I had a lot of like helpful quotations on my wall,
I
which,
had those. That's
yeah,
mad.
yeah, which I love because, I mean, they're not quite affirmations, but they're just reminders. And there was this particular boy who was utterly miserable for very understandable reasons. He said, Meg, I can't live my life by quotations. And I was like, yes, but what you do live your life by is really depressing songs that you keep playing again and again and again, and he did. So, and your mind is listening to all that. So if you keep, it's like junk food. If you keep eating junk food, you will end up feeling crap. And if you keep feeding your mind terrible messages, you will feel crap.
So it's about striking a balance between having the music that feels like it matches our mood and soothes us, and
Yes,
realizing when it's feeding
yes,
our mood and
yes,
feeding that.
yes.
And this lad you're talking about, I heard a quote this week that I thought it made me stop completely. I almost made the train stop. I pulled the emergency handle. It just felt like such a pithy way of summarising so much of what we do and what we learn about people in our work. And she said, all behaviour is optimum for what is believed.
Yeah, absolutely. That is it, isn't it? Is
And that's what he's doing. So he's believing something. I can't live by that quote because I don't believe that. And
yeah,
so there's always going to be that kind of block in the way
yes.
of a change, of evolution, of growth, if we can't change our beliefs about ourselves, because that's where we get rooted then.
Yes, exactly. And so I like to put in just really positive messages for myself, which is, it's sounding a bit cheesy, but it's like eating healthy food. Go and eat a banana or something. Go and spend some time looking at something that is uplifting. So there's a particular a performance artist called Adam Roa, ROA, and he has this wonderful poem that he performs on, find it on YouTube easy, called I Am Enough. And honestly, it
Oh,
gives
I know
me
this.
spine tingling, every time I watch him perform that and listen to what he says. And it's so, counter to our culture of actually, you're not enough. You should be working harder. You should be doing better than this. And he's like, no, no, I am enough. Um,
Actually, that is a political statement in itself, isn't it?
yeah,
It's a bold place to be.
yes,
And
yeah,
actually, because what you could easily have done with the schoolgirls and the groups of women is shrink from your life, and that's, I think, perhaps what Adam is fighting against.
mm, mm,
Because if we believe those projections and if we believe those narratives that we have about ourselves, then we will shrink from the world, because there'll be things that we can't control, and so they will
yes,
become so terrifying that we will then just retreat and retreat, or we might try and control, or at least fight with our loved ones.
yes,
And so our relationships then become contentious, because the terror of not being able to control the outcome
yes, yes,
becomes the thing then that leads us, that takes
yeah.
over.
Yes, and I think on top of your kind of initial projection, if you like, you then add a sort of broader thing. I mean, in CBT, we talk about the three Ps, that these, whatever it is that you're believing and you're projecting, you think that they are permanent, pervasive, and personal. So, it's only you that's feeling like this because,
Hmm.
you are really basically a loser. So why can't you control your
Hmm.
own brain, kind of thing? It's going to spread through everything. Your whole life is going to be affected, and it's going to be like this forever. And you go, well, if that's the projection you're putting top of your own director's cut on top of whatever it is you're projecting in the first place, oh my life, you're in a really shit place, aren't you?
Yeah, and never going to escape that. You are
Never
under
going to
that
escape it.
completely.
Never going to escape it. No, no. Anyway, you wanted to talk about red flags.
Yeah, the projected fear versus a red flag. Have you got any
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
Oh
What is the
gosh.
difference between, like, recognizing that sometimes things are just fear? Like, maybe I'm picturing somebody standing on top of a diving board.
Yes.
Is that fear? Is that a very realistic red flag, because we don't know how many rocks are
Underneath.
underneath us? And,
Yes.
so is it a real world fear where our actual bodily self could be harmed? Or, arguably, there could be situations where we think, do you know what, I don't feel psychologically safe doing that. I don't want to go into that because I feel like I am at risk of humiliation, or I'm going to remove myself from this toxic group. Or so it's
Yes.
not just a physical danger, is it? Sometimes there can be a psychological danger that it is actually probably quite prudent to avoid.
Yes, it's when do you stop feeling the fear and do it anyway, isn't it? It's like,
Mm,
I suppose that's just got to be a very personal decision. When do I feel that I can work to my edges here, and just step over them?
what a
And
great
when do I
phrase, work to
um,
my edges.
yeah, and when do I feel, no, no, that is one step too far? And I suppose, again, it's a sort of classic of CBT, that any of these things that are really scary to you, you take little steps, one step. How can you break this thing down so that each step is manageable? And then catastrophe is avoided because you haven't taken such a big step that you're really in difficulty.
No, that
And
makes sense. Because if we're standing atop a diving board, maybe one of the smaller steps would be to get in the water lower down, check out
yeah,
where the rocks are, see
yes,
how deep the water is. So that, yeah, there are steps we can take. That's a very sort of literal
yeah, yeah,
example, but
yeah,
I can see how psychologically or maybe more relationally that the smaller steps are perhaps a little bit
yes.
less literal.
But I'm thinking there are situations, and I think it's maybe, if you're talking to somebody maybe somebody who's in an abusive relationship, for example, the particular person is a really serious danger to them. And I think that's sometimes quite hard because, of course, people in abusive relationships often will keep going back to the abuser because familiarity feels safe. And so it's really difficult to disentangle there because you've kind of got chimp going, your chimp brain going, but it's okay, I'm used to this is fine. And the prefrontal cortex joining in with that and going, yeah, we know about this, better the devil you know than the devil you don't know. It's all good. But actually, that is all far too dangerous and ultimately could kill you. So managing to sort of step back from that and working out that this is not a situation where you feel the fear and do it anyway. I think that's difficult work, and you probably, that's the sort of work where a therapist on your side is really helpful, encouraging you to keep yourself safe, because this actually is a really dangerous situation.
And actually, we know, don't we, that lots of abusive partners murder
Yes,
or seriously
yes,
harm when the victim in the relationship is the one that is leaving. At that point, that's when they are most at
yes,
risk. So there's fear and danger and risk
yes,
in both going back and in
and
leaving.
in leaving.
And so you're saying a therapist can help kind of separate those two,
Yes,
the
yes,
red flags from the projected fear. This is a real fear, and this seems fair that you should take this seriously. And
yes,
yeah,
yes,
that because
yes,
it's somebody who's not got whose chimp brain is being activated by utterly different things elsewhere, and hopefully through their training will not have their chimp brain simulated at all during the session, so they can bring a much more rational and
yes.
level-headed perspective to your circumstances.
Yes, and it's difficult, isn't it? Because as a counsellor, you're always saying, I'm not advising you, I'm not going to tell you what to do.
Mm,
But I think sometimes in these sort of situations, some coaching is appropriate, being the sort of cheerleader, the person who is like, I'm here for you. And, we agreed that this was going to happen. So, this needs to happen. And there's a sort of accountability
mm.
to the therapist. And that can be really useful in certain circumstances. A bit like in AA groups where, you're accountable to the group, or you're accountable to your supporter, to help you to stay safe.
Which is just such a testament, isn't it, to what relational beings we are.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
yeah, a group of people who perhaps were previously strangers, like for instance in a support group like that, they can end up being the thing that saves us, because we may be harmed through relationships, but we are certainly healed through them too.
Yes, and I'm just thinking red flags again, and the thing that is dangerous or not dangerous. So just thinking about a certain client here where, for her authentic self is not somebody who wants to take risks and, fly the world and, just be that kind of 21st century person that seems to be the aspirational person, just basically amazing. She would just like to have a quiet life, and then worries that she's boring because she's not prepared to, feel the fear and do it anyway. She just wants to be going, I don't want to do that. But I think, then again, that is a projection, isn't it? That idea that I have to be that exciting person. And if I'm not, that's something to be ashamed of. It's like, it's okay to be who you want to be,
Mhm.
and find that person who you are really comfortable being, despite all these projections and your director's cut and everything else.
And what's difficult for us all, I think, certainly in my past it's been, and for people in front of me at work, is that it is impossible for people to see that if, for instance, this woman you're talking about, if she did just sit in that place that she wanted to be in, and sort of embodied that authentic self, That is perhaps the most powerful and bold and striking thing that she could ever do.
Yes.
And that is never going to be boring for
No,
somebody to be in the presence of.
exactly.
She'll be shining, she'll be radiant, and that is the kind of thing that people gravitate towards, even if it is a stillness or a quietness or yeah, kind of not racing around, not chasing.
Yes, I absolutely hate that phrase, you know, that you have to fulfill your potential, fulfill your potential. And if you're like, if you're somebody who is choosing to live a life of peace and quietness, you know, eh, there's a kind of, there's this sort of judgment that, oh, couldn't you be doing a bit more than that? But of course, you are fulfilling your potential. You're just not doing that it in that kind of
Hmm.
I don't know, kind of materialistic sort of way, that
Sensational bit,
sensational sort of way.
or populist, that
Yeah.
just because
Yes.
a significant
Yes.
majority want to do that, or at least do they really? I
Yes.
wonder how
Yes.
many kids
Do
in
they?
school enjoy that kind of loud atmosphere
Yeah.
that they're
Yeah.
subjected to. And this reminds me what you've just said, of what you said right at the top of the session, that the title of today, this notion of the mind fearing its own projections, is in everything. Because what you're talking about, at least with that woman you were mentioning earlier, is the conflict that we have between who we are and who we want to be, or who we
Yes.
are and who we feel we should be. That conflict is, it's inherent in everything, isn't it? In
Yes.
all our distress, is I should be this other person.
Yes. 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 And trying to work out what you want and how is that different from the should, because there's like kind of like, well, I want to be like this, but then I've got this voice going, ah, yes, but that's not good enough, it should be that. And then, well, is that what I want? Do I want to be that thing that I'm being told I should be? And it's very, very confusing.
And people always saying then, so what will I be if I'm not that?
Mm,
What will I be? And there's an idea then, if I continue down this route and I try and be this person I feel I should be, then I can imagine this person I'm going to be, and that, and I don't know, maybe they've got ideas about social success or financial security or whatever might come as a result of, if I could just embody this person I feel I should be. Or maybe the opposite is true, that they fear they will disappear, or that they won't matter, that authentic self just does not carry the same weight because it's just been eroded gently over the years. And so I think it's interesting to sit with people and take them to the what if. So when somebody's saying, oh my god, but what if
yes,
uh, I never get that job? What happens if I can never leave this relationship? What happens if?
yes,
And then I
yes,
go, okay, so let's take that, let's look at
yes.
that. I'm not afraid of, if that happens.
Mm, mm,
Let's see where that takes you. Is this a physical death, or is it an egoic death? Is it a death of this kind of projected self that you want, or is it, I'm going to jump off a diving board onto a pile of rocks?
mm,
What is at stake here? And
mm,
let's try and fathom it out. And so I think one way of figuring out whether it's a red flag or a projected fear is to take people through right to the end. Okay, let's really get hold of that fear. Let's put it between us, because we're just in a room here.
mm, mm,
You know,
mm,
those rocks are not going to smack you in the face from in here. How, when we hold this, what comes up? What
yeah,
happens? What are you reminded of? What can we just explore it, be curious about it, look at the contours of it? And I think from within that sort of stiller space, people, at least in therapy, I think therapy increases our tolerance for uncertainty, increases our acceptance of our lack of control, and I think it just expands that space,
mm, mm, mm.
and helps people feel more safe.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think looking at what ifs can be just, yeah, very, very powerful. You know, looking at the worst case scenario. So, supposing this appalling thing that you are imagining, that you are projecting, did happen. Okay, well, then, what would you do? What's your plan? I'm
Hmm.
always sort of, it's a bit of a cliche, really, that for me, making a plan is a real antidote to fear. Because, you know, if you've got your plan, and you might have plan A, and you might have plan B, you might have plan C, but you know, you've got something that you know you would be capable of doing in the
Hmm.
face of this awful fear. Because really, you know, we do have the capacity to deal with stuff. I mean,
Hmm.
that's often the thing, that people are so scared that I just would be a complete wreck. I would just break down. I would this or that or the other. And you go, well, actually, let's think about this. Really, what would you do if
Hmm.
this awful thing happened? Could you imagine yourself actually doing? Well,
Hmm. I totally agree with that.
yeah, Yeah.
That people lack, they fear they lack the resources, and
Yes.
absolutely they do not. We are very rarely put in situations where we can't cope, and even in situations where we can't cope, we can cope with that later. People who've been in near-death experiences
Yeah.
and arguably have not coped with it in that moment, the capacity to unravel that and cope with it, metabolize it, make it a part of your life, bring it close. All that healing is possible,
Yes.
and that's even in incredibly extreme circumstances. And
Yeah.
so, what we're talking about then is people's fear of discomfort,
Yes.
of
Yes.
yeah, I don't want to fail. I don't want to get it wrong. I don't want to. Just the feeling of uncertainty is terrifying for so
Yes.
many of us.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. And so then you become, like there's a secondary anxiety. You're not actually anxious about anything, but you're frightened of anxiety itself. Um,
Huh.
yeah, which because it feels horrible. Yeah,
Yeah,
which
I must concede that it's hardly pleasant, is it?
it's hardly pleasant, but it is bearable. Lots of things are feel unbearable, and there's lots of situations where we know that we can bear the discomfort. So what is so scary about bearing this other sort of discomfort? But
Discomfort of the self. Yeah, the fear
yes,
that
yes,
myself is at stake, because that's what
yes,
our society values so much. You're right.
yeah. But I just wanted to go back to trauma again
Mm.
because I don't want to sort of dismiss this and go, you've had this terrible traumatic experience, and well, you can deal with it. You're just going to get used to it. And I think it is it is unusual, isn't it, that as mammals we're not good at discharging trauma, and we do seem to need interventions like EMDR or the rewind, or all sorts. There's all sorts of different interventions for trauma, but it works somatically. Because there's a wonderful video on YouTube about the polar bear that's been pursued by a helicopter, and they've put a dart in it, and that's tried to, I mean, they're doing it for scientific reasons, so we'll let them off. But then when the polar bear comes round, it does this amazing, it does these huge deep breaths, and it shakes. And it's like
Mm.
you see it's shaking off that trauma, and
Mm.
then it can just get up and go away and do whatever it wants to do. And somehow or another, perhaps because our brains are so much more complex, I don't know, but for people who've been traumatized, they're not able to do that. And then there's the evidence that if they have been able to move, to run from the two towers falling down or whatever, or they've got out of the burning car and they've run away, then that seems to do the job much better than if
Mm-hmm.
you're like trapped in the burning car.
Mm.
That's where that inability to shake it off as we're meant to as mammals, then it can't happen. And if I could find a magic way of helping people to go, just discharge, be able to just discharge whatever comes up for you, whatever you're projecting, just be able to let it go, gosh, that would be fantastic. It'd be a miracle.
Absolutely. And Emily and Amelia Nagoski, when they talk about burnout, talk about emotions are like tunnels. You have to go all the way to the other side to get to the
Mm,
light.
mm, mm.
That concept of, because what happens in our society is that we feel there is an expectation that, oh God, that person died. They died 2 weeks ago. Why am I not over it yet? Or
Yeah, yeah,
that we
yeah,
have this expectation that, yeah, that happened, but it happened 20 years ago. Why am I still
yes,
upset about it? Or it wasn't even that big. And I think other traumas that we suffer from are the death by a thousand cuts, the little
yes,
snips and snipes that go
yes,
on through our lives that compound something. So they become
yes,
such a part of our narrative
yes,
that again, that our society makes it impossible for us to kind of acknowledge the power that those have had on
mm,
our psyche, or our ability to unfreeze from them, and, like you
yes,
say, shake it off. Because it's
yes,
like, and it is a more complex shaking off, but it is still a shaking off. It is an accepting that this happened. That was, ooh, these
yeah,
are all the ways why that was utterly catastrophic for me.
yes,
And here
yeah.
is now my moving on.
Yes,
Mm.
because we are amazingly resourceful as human beings, and we are survivors. That's why we are still here, isn't it? But sometimes, in your depths of your fear, of your uncertainty, and your feeling that you're out of control, you lose sight of the fact that you do have these resources as a human being. A lot of it, are relational. That the help of other people supporting you. I actually like to give a plug for a really popular bestseller at the moment, which is the one that's called Why Has Nobody Told Me This Before by Dr. Julie Smith, which is just a really practical, easy to read discussion of mental health and what you can do about it. And I think she'd probably agree with a huge amount of what we said today. And she talks about bad guesses, and I love that concept that because we've got our director's cut, and because we've got our own little evil projections, that we're are managing things for us, we then make these bad guesses. And she says, for example, bad guess 1, I have to make sure that nothing bad ever happens. Bad guess 2, I won't cope with the feelings if I face anxiety. Bad guess 3, the feeling will get worse and worse. I will pass out, humiliate myself, die. And you're going, that's a really nice, simple way of talking about what we do when we're dealing with our projections, this idea of the bad guesses. So
I like that phrase. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
Bad guesses.
Bad guesses.
So the book again, what's the book called?
It's Why Has Nobody Told Me This Before by Dr. Julie Smith. And, it's like, I quite like self-help books. I know a lot of people pour scorn on them, but quite often the people who write them, they've hit some nails on the head, and they write them in a really readable, accessible way. So I do like that one.
Oh, thank you for that.
Yeah.
And if people wanted to come and find you, where would they find you?
So I have a website, which is www.megharper.co.uk, and you'll find everything you need to know there about me. I do work a bit on Zoom with individuals, but not with couples. Couples work I always do face-to-face. Majority of work, I work from my room in Warwick, so mostly it's face-to-face. And I'm on the BACP directory. I'm also on Psychology Today, if people prefer to find me that way.
Oh, super. Thank you very much. Meg, it has been a delight talking to you.
It's been really, really interesting, and just loved it. Thank you so much, Nadine.
There's something really exciting I want to share with you all. I've been looking for a way to make it easy for you folks to get in touch that isn't social media, and I'm delighted to say that I've found it, and it's really easy for you to use too. Just go to the show notes and you'll see the link. It just says send me a text message. Click that and you'll be taken through the process. Please know that the function is one way only, but while I can't reply to you directly, I do read all the messages, and I am excited to respond to some of your comments in the podcast in the future. Of course, you could also use this feature to share with me any ideas you might have for future episodes. I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks for being with us this episode. The B-side, which takes one aspect of this episode and digs a little deeper into how that might be explored in the therapy room, will drop very soon. In the meantime, if you'd like to have more of our conversations and metaphorical excavations, it would be grand for you and grand for us if you would subscribe to the podcast or share a favourite episode with a friend.